I don't think we've ever had a strong economy. Signature Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, a few banks started to fail, right? The non-farm payroll report that we had, the most recent one, was horrible. So when you see a weak dollar and when you see surging gold prices, that's an indication that monetary policy is...
Think inflation is just rising prices? You've been misled. Peter Schiff is about to reveal the truth that the government doesn't want you to know. Inflation isn't caused by greedy corporations or Putin. It's caused by the relentless printing of money by the Federal Reserve. In this video, Peter exposes how the government uses inflation as a hidden tax, funding massive deficits at your expense. The worst part? It's only going to get worse. If you want to know what's really driving the crisis in your wallet and what's coming next, you can't afford to miss this.
Inflation is a very simple concept. It's just the money supply expanding. And so the more money there is, right, that's what you're inflating. That's where the word literally comes from. Over time, the government has been very successful in changing the definition of inflation to fool the public as to its source. Because if the public understood what inflation was, they would know that it's not caused by grocery stores. You know, when Kamala Harris says it's greedy grocery stores that are causing inflation, if you understand that inflation is an increase in the money supply, well, you know it can't possibly be the grocery stores because they don't have a printing press. They can't expand the money supply. But if you think that inflation is rising prices, well, yeah, the grocery store keeps raising my prices, so they're causing inflation. They're raising prices because the government created inflation. The prices are going up in response to the inflation that's been created. But by changing the definition of inflation, the government not only confuses the public as to who's creating it, but now they're able to blame it on other factors like greedy corporations or Putin. That was, Biden kept talking about Putin, and Putin was causing the inflation. There's only one source of inflation in America, and that's the Federal Reserve. But the reason the Federal Reserve is creating all that inflation is because the government is running massive deficits. And so the Federal Reserve is financing those deficits by buying those bonds with the inflation that it creates, the money that it prints. And so the best way to look at inflation is a tax, right? Inflation is what we pay for the government that we don't pay for with the income tax or the Social Security tax or a sales tax. Basically, the deficits, the federal budget deficits, we end up funding them by inflation. And those deficits are about to skyrocket. They've been skyrocketing. And so the inflation tax is going to be much bigger in 2025 than it was this year, regardless of what the Fed is trying to tell us. Well, the Fed is now focused on employment, the economy, which has clearly come under a lot of pressure recently, is very close to officially, I think, falling into recession. I think we've been in recession pretty much the whole time. I just don't even believe the numbers the way the government manufactures them. So I don't think we've ever had a strong economy. I just think that that's just been a statistical anomaly. And even if you look through the statistics, you can actually see a lot of the inherent weakness that is being masked by a lot of these superficial numbers. But when the Fed stopped hiking rates, it was because banks started to fail. If you remember what happened with Signature Valley Bank or Signature Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, a few banks started to fail as a result of rising interest rates. And then the Fed really backed off. And of course, they had to have a big bailout program to prevent a lot more banks from suffering a similar fate. But that's really when the rate hikes stopped. And so the Fed kind of kept rates where they were, but kept implying that, look, we're going to cut eventually. We just need enough proof that inflation is going back down to 2%. And they said, we're not going to wait for 2%. We just have to believe that it's going there. Now, of course, the reason they're not going to wait for 2% is because it's never going to get to 2%. And they probably know that. But at this point, the jobs numbers are getting so bad, right? The non-farm payroll report that we had, The most recent one was horrible. And now the government fessed up and came back and said, 818,000 jobs that we claimed were created. Oh, we made a mistake. They're not actually there. And I think they made a bigger mistake. I think there's actually a lot more jobs that they're pretending were created that aren't really there. And in fact, the only reason that we have more jobs now than when Biden was elected is because so many people have 2 or 3 jobs. That's where all the jobs are coming from. It's moonlighting. And the people that now have 2 or 3 jobs, they don't want all these jobs. They'd like to be able to support their family on one job. But unfortunately, the rent's gone up so much, the grocery bill, the utility bill, the insurance, everything is now so expensive because of all this inflation that people have to work multiple jobs. And now Joe Biden wants to claim credit for creating those jobs. But the public blames him for the fact that people are forced to work those jobs. But I think it's the weakness in the economy that is prompting the Fed to cut rates, which they're going to do here in September. They've now prepared the markets for these cuts, and they're not going to just do one and done. This is going to be the beginning of as many rate cuts as they can get away with. And I think ultimately they're going to return to QE. They've already reduced the size of their quantitative tightening program. And I think that was the first step to reversing it and going back to QE, which is inflation creation. QE is just, another word for inflation. Just that, it sounds better. It's like it's a euphemism, but that's really what it is. But the Fed has to pretend that it's finished the job on inflation. It can't, be honest and say, look, we still have high inflation and it's going to go up, but, we don't care. So they have to pretend that the 3% inflation that we have now is going to go down to 2%. But, we've been at 3% now for over a year, right? We went down from 9 to about 3, but there's no indication that we're going from 3 to 2. In fact, if you look at the market indicators on Friday, when Powell, delivered his statements, his Jackson Hole speech, on that day, gold was at a new record high. The gold price was above 2,500. I mean, as we're speaking here, I think it's around 2,520. And the US dollar index on Friday sank to a 13-month low. So when you see a weak dollar and when you see surging gold prices, that's an indication that monetary policy is too easy and that inflation is going up, not down. In fact, the only reason that inflation came from 9% year over year to 3% was because we got a 24% rise in the value of the dollar. That happened. And after that big rise in the value of the dollar, then prices started to come down because the dollar was so much more valuable relative to other currencies. That brought down commodity prices and that brought down the CPI. But now the dollar has already fallen 10% from its peak, and it looks like it's going to fall a lot more. This weak dollar is going to be a huge tailwind for inflation, and record high gold prices are telling you that that's exactly what's going to happen.
Inflation is a hidden tax that's only getting bigger. If you want to stay ahead of this financial storm, make sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with those who need to hear the truth. Peter Schiff will keep exposing the lies, breaking down what's really happening with your money. Stay informed, stay prepared, and we'll see you in the next video.